In the vast darkness between stars, where ancient civilizations have risen and fallen for millions of years, there exists a whisper that chills even the most hardened warriors. It speaks of a species so fierce, so unpredictable, that they turned the tide of wars with nothing but primitive weapons and unbreakable will. The Galactic Council dismissed these tales as myths, stories told to frighten younglings in the dark. After all, how could a species that barely mastered fire defeat empires that had conquered galaxies? But legends have a way of becoming reality when you least expect them. And sometimes, the monsters in the stories aren't the ones you should fear. Sometimes, the real terror comes from the heroes you never believed existed. The day humanity stepped onto the battlefield, the universe learned that some legends are born not from imagination, but from memory. And some memories are too terrible to forget, no matter how hard you try. The Zephyrian battlecruiser Eternal Glory hung in space like a silver blade against the starfield, its hull scarred from countless battles. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed behind his back, as he watched the tactical display. The war had been raging for 3 cycles now, and the Dominion forces were pushing deeper into Allied territory every day. "Admiral," Communications Officer Veltar called out, her voice tight with confusion. "We're receiving a transmission from the Outer Rim. It's strange." Kethvar turned, his reptilian features creasing into a frown. "Strange how?" "The signal is weak. Ancient even. It's coming from a system that's been dead for over 10,000 years. Sector 7741. The bridge fell silent. Every spacer knew about Sector 7741. It was a graveyard of civilizations, a place where ancient wars had burned entire star systems to ash. Nothing lived there anymore. Nothing could live there. "Put it through," Kethvar ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing a face that made several crew members step back in shock. It was humanoid, but unlike anything they'd seen before. The being had pale skin marked with scars, eyes the color of winter ice, and hair like burnt copper. Most unsettling of all, it had only 2 arms. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force ship Indomitable," the being said in accented galactic standard. "We received your distress call. We're coming to help." Kethvar felt his blood chill. Terran, human. The species from the old stories, the ones that were supposed to be extinct or mythical. He forced himself to speak. "Unknown vessel, this is Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian fleet. I don't know what game you're playing, but humans don't exist. They're legends." The human's scarred face showed something that might have been amusement. "Admiral, legends don't usually answer distress calls. We'll be at your position in 6 hours. Chen, out." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. First Officer Darwin was the first to speak. "Admiral, the old records mention humans, but they've been gone for thousands of years. Most scholars believe they never existed at all." Kethvar moved to his command station and accessed the ship's historical database. The entries were old, fragmentary, translated through dozens of languages over millennia, but they were there. Species designation human. Origin, Sol System, Sector 7741. Known for extreme adaptability, psychological warfare, unwillingness to surrender. Last confirmed contact, 8K ED847 Galactic Standard years ago. Status, extinct. But, as Kethvar read, more details emerged. Humans had been involved in 3 major galactic conflicts. Each time, they'd appeared seemingly from nowhere, turned the tide of impossible battles, then vanished again. The accounts were contradictory and often unbelievable. One report claimed that humans had held a single planet against an entire armada for 2 years, using nothing but primitive kinetic weapons and an inexplicable refusal to die. Another described human warriors who continued fighting even after sustaining injuries that would kill most species instantly. "Sir," Tactical Officer Xanth interrupted his reading. "Long-range sensors are picking up a ship approaching from Sector 7741. It's not like anything in our databases." The image that appeared on screen made Kethvar's heart skip a beat. The ship was angular, brutal in its simplicity. Where most vessels were curved and elegant, this one looked like it had been built for one purpose: war. Its hull was matte black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, and weapon ports dotted its surface like predatory eyes. "Energy signature is unlike anything we've recorded," Xanth reported. "The ship appears to be using some form of fusion drive, but the power output is enormous. How are they containing that much energy in such a small vessel?" Kethvar studied the approaching ship. It was perhaps a third the size of his battlecruiser, yet something about it radiated menace. Time to intercept? 4 hours, 37 minutes, Admiral. Open a channel to Fleet Command. Tell them we may have a situation. While his communications officer worked, Kethvar continued reading the historical files. The more he learned, the more disturbed he became. Humans, according to the ancient records, didn't follow the accepted rules of warfare. They used tactics that other species considered either impossible or insane. There was an account from the Veltari Empire about human soldiers who had continued a battle for 6 days without sleep, food, or water. Another report described humans who had turned their own wounded into weapons, using injured comrades as living bombs. But perhaps most disturbing were the psychological profiles. Human warriors, the reports claimed, became more dangerous when injured, cornered, or outnumbered. Other species fought to survive, humans fought to win, regardless of the cost. Admiral, Darwin said quietly, perhaps we should move our position. If these humans are hostile, no. Kethvar's voice was firm. We came here to hold this system against the Dominion. If these humans want to fight, they'll have to go through us first. But even as he spoke, Kethvar wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. The Dominion was a known enemy, predictable in their brutality. These humans were something else entirely. 3 hours later, the human ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. It didn't slow down or change course. It simply accelerated toward the Zephyrian fleet at a velocity that should have torn the ship apart. "Incoming transmission," Baltar announced. Captain Chen's face reappeared on screen. Behind her, Kethvar could see other humans moving with fluid efficiency. They all shared the same predatory grace, the same unsettling eyes. "Admiral Kethvar, we're reading Dominion ships massing at the edge of your sensor range. They'll attack within the hour. We're here to help, but we need you to follow our lead." "Follow your lead?" Kethvar bristled. "I have 12 battle cruisers and 40 escort ships. You have one vessel that's probably older than my grandfather." Chen's expression didn't change. "Admiral, my ship is equipped with weapons your people haven't seen for 10,000 years. My crew has been fighting for longer than your civilization has existed. We know the Dominion. We know how to beat them. The question is, do you trust legends?" Before Kethvar could respond, alarms began blaring across the bridge. Xantha's voice cut through the noise. "Dominion fleet emerging from hyperspace. 67 ships, including at least 12 dreadnoughts." On the tactical display, red icons appeared like a spreading infection. The Dominion fleet was massive, outnumbering the Allied force almost 2-1. At the center of their formation sat something that made Kethvar's blood freeze. A Dominion harvester. A ship the size of a small moon, designed to strip entire planets bare. "Admiral," Chen's voice was calm despite the approaching doom. "Permission to engage?" Kethvar looked at the tactical display, then at the human captain's steady gaze. Legends or not, they were about to face annihilation. What did he have to lose? "Permission granted, Captain Chen. Try not to get my people killed." "No promises, Admiral. Humans don't play it safe." The transmission ended, and Kethvar watched as the human ship broke formation, accelerating toward the Dominion fleet at impossible speed. His tactical officer was shouting readings that didn't make sense. The human ship is approaching 60% light speed. Their hull should be experiencing critical stress failure. But the ship held together, a dark arrow cutting through space toward an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000-1. As it closed the distance, weapon ports along its hull began to glow with an eerie blue light. "What are those weapons?" Dalewyn whispered. Kethvar didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too busy watching as the human ship opened fire, and space itself seemed to tear apart around its weapons. The legends, it seemed, were about to become reality, and Kethvar had the terrible suspicion that the Dominion had no idea what they were about to face. The first human weapon burst struck the lead Dominion destroyer, and the ship simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, as if it had never been built at all. "By the ancestors," Xanth breathed. What kind of weapons can do that? But Kethvar was already moving, his training taking over even as his mind struggled to process what he'd seen. "All ships, advance to support the human vessel, and pray to whatever gods you follow that they stay on our side." As the Eternal Glory and its escorts moved forward, Kethvar couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing something that would change the course of galactic history. The humans had returned, and they had brought with them weapons and tactics from an age when wars were fought not just for territory or resources, but for the very survival of entire species. The real battle was about to begin, and for the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kethvar wasn't sure which side he should fear more. The space around the human ship Indomitable rippled with energy distortions as it carved through the Dominion fleet like a predator among prey. Admiral Kethvar watched in horrified fascination as another Dominion cruiser simply vanished under the strange blue fire from the human weapons. "Admiral," Zanth called out, his voice tight with disbelief, "I'm reading impossible energy signatures from that ship. Their weapons are operating on principles our science doesn't recognize." Captain Chen's voice crackled across the communications channel, calm despite the chaos erupting around her vessel. "Admiral Kethvar, we need your fleet to form a defensive sphere around coordinates 77 Mark IV. The Dominion is about to try something desperate." "What are you talking about?" Kethvar demanded, even as he watched his tactical display. The human ship had destroyed 6 Dominion vessels in as many minutes, but the enemy fleet was regrouping, their formation shifting into something he'd never seen before. "They're going to sacrifice half their fleet to get the Harvester close enough to crack the system's star," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "It's an old Dominion tactic. They'd rather destroy everything than let it fall into enemy hands." Kethvar felt his blood chill. The Damara system contained 3 inhabited worlds with a combined population of nearly 2 billion souls. "That's impossible." "No one would. Admiral, the Dominion aren't like other species," Chen interrupted. "They're refugees from a dying galaxy, and they've been fighting extinction for so long that they've forgotten what it means to value life. They'll burn everything rather than lose." As if summoned by her words, the Dominion fleet suddenly changed tactics. The smaller vessels began accelerating directly toward the Allied formation, while the massive Harvester and its escort dreadnoughts moved toward the system's star. Energy readings spiked across Kethvar's displays as the approaching ships began overloading their power cores. "Suicide runs," Darwin breathed. "They're going to try to ram us. All ships, evasive maneuvers," Kethvar ordered. "Concentrate fire on the approaching vessels." But even as his fleet opened fire, he realized it wouldn't be enough. The Dominion had committed 40 ships to the suicide charge, and his 12 battlecruisers couldn't stop them all. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the human ship," Belter announced. Chen's face appeared on screen again, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood other humans, and Kethvar could see they were preparing for something. Their movements had the fluid coordination of a species that had evolved for war. "Admiral, we're going to need to do this the hard way," Chen said. "My ship is going after the Harvester. Your fleet needs to hold position and survive the next 15 minutes. 15 minutes? Kethvar couldn't hide his incredulity. "Against 40 suicide ships? That's impossible." For the first time, Chen smiled, and the expression was anything but reassuring. "Admiral, you're thinking like a civilized species. Sometimes survival requires becoming something else entirely." The transmission ended, and Kethvar watched as the Indomitable suddenly changed course, abandoning the defensive formation and streaking directly toward the Harvester. Behind it, space itself seemed to shimmer as some kind of exotic field enveloped the human ship. "What are they doing?" Zanth demanded. Kethvar didn't have time to answer. The first wave of Dominion suicide ships was almost upon them, their hulls glowing white-hot as they pushed their drives beyond safe limits. He could see the fanatical determination in their approach. They would die before they failed. But then something impossible happened. The space around the Allied fleet began to fill with small objects, thousands of them, each no larger than a fighter craft but moving with precise coordination. They hadn't been there moments before, as if they had materialized from nothing. "Admiral, I'm reading massive energy signatures appearing throughout our defensive perimeter," Zanth reported, his voice rising with confusion. "These aren't showing up on any scanner until they're already here. The small objects, whatever they were, moved to intercept the incoming suicide ships with mechanical precision. As they closed distance, Kethvar realized they weren't ships at all. They were weapons, autonomous weapons that seemed to phase in and out of normal space. The first Dominion ship struck one of the mysterious objects and exploded in a brilliant flash. Then another. Within moments, the entire suicide charge was being systematically destroyed by weapons that shouldn't exist. "By the ancestors," Darwin whispered. "What kind of technology is this?" Before Kethvar could respond, another transmission came from the human ship. This time it wasn't Chen, but a different human, older, with scars that spoke of battles fought in the dark between stars. "Allied Fleet, this is Colonel Marcus Webb, Terran Special Operations. Those are Mark 7 ghost drones. autonomous weapons designed for exactly this kind of engagement. They'll handle the small fry. Just try not to shoot at them by accident. The transmission cut off, leaving Kethvar staring at his tactical display in amazement. The mysterious drones had eliminated the suicide charge with ruthless efficiency, but they were already disappearing again, phasing out of normal space as quickly as they had appeared. Meanwhile, the Indomitable had reached the Harvester. The Dominion command ship was massive, over 20 kilometers long and bristling with enough firepower to level a planet's surface. Escort dreadnoughts moved to protect it, their weapon systems coming online with deadly intent. Against such a force, even a legendary human ship seemed impossibly small. But the Indomitable didn't slow down or try to evade. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the Harvester's hull, its strange blue weapons tearing into the massive ship's armor with impossible precision. "Sensors are going crazy," Xanth reported. "The human ship is somehow existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's attacking from angles that don't exist in normal space." Kethvar watched in fascination as the Indomitable seemed to flicker in and out of reality, striking the Harvester from above, below, and through its hull simultaneously. The Dominion escort ships fired everything they had, but their weapons passed harmlessly through empty space where the human ship should have been. "This isn't possible," Darwin breathed. "How are they doing this?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yelanti, the fleet's chief science officer, had been quietly monitoring the battle from her station. Now she spoke up, her voice filled with awe and terror. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the energy signatures from the human ship. They're not just using advanced technology. They're using weaponized space-time distortions. They're literally folding reality around themselves." "That's theoretical physics," Darwin protested. "No one has ever successfully—" "No one we know of," Yelanti interrupted. "But these humans, they're operating on principles that our science considers impossible. They're not just fighting in 3 dimensions, they're fighting in 11. The battle around the Harvester intensified. The massive Dominion ship was beginning to show damage, its armor cracking under the assault from weapons that seemed to strike from every direction at once. But the Harvester wasn't defenseless. As Kethvar watched, weapon ports along its hull began to glow with ominous energy. "The Harvester is charging its primary weapon," Xanth announced. "If it fires at the star—" The sentence was cut off as space itself seemed to scream. The Harvester's weapon discharged, sending a beam of pure destruction toward the system's star. If it connected, the stellar mass would destabilize, destroying everything within several light-years. But the beam never reached its target. The Indomitable had somehow positioned itself directly in the weapon's path, and instead of being destroyed, the human ship seemed to absorb the energy. Its hull glowed like a miniature star, as exotic fields contained forces that should have vaporized any known material. "Impossible," Yelanti breathed. "They're using the Harvester's own weapon against it. They're channeling that energy back into their dimensional drives." What happened next would be recorded in history as the moment the galaxy learned to fear humanity once again. The Indomitable suddenly expanded, not in size, but in presence. It existed simultaneously at dozens of points around the Harvester, each instance firing those terrifying blue weapons with surgical precision. The massive Dominion ship, which had seemed invincible moments before, began to come apart at a molecular level. "Admiral." Chen's voice returned to the communications channel, calm despite the impossible energy swirling around her ship. "The Harvester is neutralized. We're moving to assist with the remaining escort ships." Kethvar looked at his tactical display. The Dominion force that had seemed overwhelming minutes before was now reduced to scattered remnants. The escort dreadnoughts were fleeing, their commanders apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor when facing weapons that operated outside known physics. "Captain Chen," he managed to say, "how is this possible? Your ship? Your weapons? None of this should exist." There was a pause before Chen responded, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of eons. "Admiral, humanity has been fighting wars for 50,000 years. We've battled across dimensions that your people don't even know exist. We've faced enemies that could reshape reality with a thought. The Dominion is just another predator, and we've learned how to hunt predators." As if to emphasize her point, another group of the mysterious ghost drones materialized near the fleeing Dominion ships. This time, Kethvar got a better look at them through his sensors, and what he saw chilled him to the bone. The drones weren't just weapons, they were fragments of destroyed enemies, reanimated and repurposed by technology that turned death itself into a weapon. Each drone was a small piece of some long-dead Dominion ship, now serving humanity's purposes with mechanical loyalty. We don't just defeat our enemies, Admiral, Chen continued. We make them part of us. Every ship they've lost to us becomes another weapon in our arsenal. Every tactic they've used against us becomes something we can turn back on them. The last of the Dominion ships vanished into hyperspace, fleeing a battle they could no longer hope to win. In the sudden silence that followed, Kethvar found himself staring at the human ship with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Humanity had saved them, but at what cost? What kind of species turned their enemies into weapons? What kind of warriors fought battles across dimensions that normal minds couldn't even comprehend? Captain Chen, he finally said, where have your people been? Why return now? The response came after a long pause, and when Chen spoke, there was something ancient and tired in her voice. We never left, Admiral. We've been fighting a war you can't imagine against enemies you've never seen. But now that war is coming to an end, and we can turn our attention to smaller conflicts. Consider this a favor between allies. As the Indomitable began moving away from the battlefield, its hull still glowing with absorbed energies, Kethvar realized that everything had changed. The humans weren't just legends, they were something far more dangerous. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, and they had just announced their return. 3 days after the battle, Admiral Kethvar stood in the observation deck of his battlecruiser, watching the human ship Indomitable maintain position near the edge of the system. It hadn't moved since the Dominion retreat, simply hanging in space like a predator waiting for its next meal. The aftermath of the engagement had been unlike anything in Kethvar's experience. There was no debris field, no wreckage to salvage or honor the dead. The Dominion ships that had been destroyed by human weapons had simply ceased to exist, as if they had been erased from reality itself. Even the space where they had died felt wrong somehow, empty in a way that made sensors malfunction and crews uneasy. Admiral, Doctor. Yolante approached, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of exhaustion. I've completed my analysis of the human weapon signatures. I need to speak with you privately. Kethvar nodded to his aide and followed the scientist to his ready room. Once the door sealed behind them, Yolante activated a privacy field and turned to face him with eyes that had seen too much. Admiral, what the humans showed us 3 days ago, it's not just advanced technology, it's something fundamentally different from how we understand the universe works. Kethvar poured himself a drink from his personal supply, noting that his hands were still trembling slightly. Explain. Their weapons don't just destroy matter and energy, Yolante said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. They erase causality itself. The Dominion ships didn't just die, they were retroactively prevented from ever having existed in that moment. The humans are weaponizing time and probability. The implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. That's godlike power. Worse, Yolante replied. Gods create and destroy according to some greater plan. The humans have turned destruction into an art form. They've learned to kill not just bodies but the very concept of existence. Before Kethvar could respond, an alert chimed through the ship. Dalewind's voice followed immediately. Admiral to the bridge. We have incoming ships. Multiple contacts. Kethvar rushed to the bridge, Yolante close behind. The tactical display showed dozens of new contacts emerging from hyperspace, but these weren't Dominion vessels. The ships were from every major power in the galaxy, the Altarian Republic, the Centauri Syndicate, the Valtari Empire, even the enigmatic watchers from the Galactic Rim. Sir, Communications Officer Veltar announced, we're receiving priority transmissions from fleet commanders representing 17 different governments. They're all asking the same question. Which is? They want to know if the reports about humans are true. Kethvar sank into his command chair as the magnitude of the situation became clear. Word of the battle had spread throughout the galaxy with impossible speed. Every major power was now aware that humanity had returned, and they all wanted answers. Put me through to the human ship, he ordered. Captain Chen's scarred face appeared on the main screen, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood several other humans, and Kethvar noticed that each one bore different insignia. These weren't just crew members, they were representatives of different human factions. Captain Chen, we have a situation developing. Multiple fleets are converging on our position, and they have questions about your people. Chen nodded grimly. We've been monitoring their communications, Admiral. They're scared, and they have every right to be. What you witnessed 3 days ago was a small demonstration of what humanity has become. And what exactly have you become? Kethvar asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. One of the other humans stepped forward. a woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of eternity. When she spoke, her voice carried authority that made even Chen defer to her. I am Director Sarah Voss, Terran Temporal Command. What we've become, Admiral, is what was necessary to survive. While your civilizations flourished in this galaxy, humanity has been fighting a war across time itself. Across time? Dalwyn whispered. The enemy you call the Dominion are refugees, fleeing something that destroyed their home galaxy, Voss explained. That something was us. We followed them here because their defeat is not yet complete. Kethvar felt the blood drain from his face. You're saying the humans destroyed an entire galaxy? Not destroyed, Voss corrected. Liberated. The beings that controlled that galaxy were parasites that fed on civilizations, growing fat on the suffering of trillions. We ended their reign, but some escaped. The Dominion carries their influence, their hunger for destruction. The tactical display chimed with new contacts. More ships were arriving, and the energy readings were massive. Kethvar recognized the signatures: Altarian dreadnoughts, Veltari war pyramids, even a Watcher sphere, ships that represented the combined military might of the galaxy.
Admiral! Chen's voice drew his attention back to the screen.
The galactic powers are about to make a mistake. They're thinking of this as a diplomatic situation that can be resolved through negotiation or force. They don't understand what they're dealing with. And what are they dealing with? Kethvar asked. Director Voss answered, her voice carrying the finality of inevitable fate. They're dealing with a species that has transcended the normal limitations of warfare. We don't just fight with ships and weapons, Admiral. We fight with cause and effect, with possibility and inevitability. We've learned to make war against the very concept of defeat. As if summoned by her words, the space around the Indomitable began to shimmer. Kethvar watched in amazement as more human ships began to appear, not arriving from hyperspace, but materializing from dimensions his senses couldn't even detect. Each ship was unique, bearing designs that spoke of wars fought across impossible battlefields. Some seemed to be made of crystallized time, others appeared to be constructed from the twisted remains of black holes. One vessel looked like it was built from the compressed essence of dying stars. By the ancestors, Zant breathed. How many ships do they have? As many as we need, Voss replied simply. We've learned to requisition vessels from alternate timelines where different choices were made. Every ship represents a reality where humanity chose a different path. The arriving galactic fleets had noticed the human vessels now, and Kethvar could see their formations shifting into defensive postures. Energy signatures spiked as weapon systems came online across dozens of ships. This is Admiral Thane of the Altarian Republic. A new voice cut across the communications channels. Unknown human vessels, you will stand down and prepare to be boarded. We have questions that require answers. Director Voss smiled, and the expression was colder than deep space. Admiral Thane, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Humanity doesn't submit to interrogation. You're outnumbered 50-1, Thane replied. Surrender now, and we can resolve this peacefully. Admiral, Voss said, turning her attention back to Kethvar. You've been a gracious ally. I suggest you withdraw your ships to a safe distance. What's about to happen won't be pleasant to watch. Kethvar looked at his tactical display. The galactic fleets represented the combined might of 17 civilizations, over 300 ships armed with the most advanced weapons known to science. Against them, the humans had perhaps 24 vessels of unknown capability. But something in Director Voss's calm confidence made him issue the order. All ships, withdraw to minimum safe distance. Do not engage unless fired upon directly. As the Zephyrian fleet pulled back, the standoff intensified. The Galactic Coalition moved into attack formation, while the human ships simply waited, motionless as tombstones in the void. Final warning, Admiral Thane broadcast. Stand down or we will open fire. Director Voss touched a control on her console, and when she spoke, her voice was broadcast to every ship in the system. Ladies and gentlemen of the Galactic Coalition, you have made a fundamental error in judgment. You believe this is a conflict between peers, a dispute that can be resolved through superior firepower. You are wrong. The human ships began to glow with that familiar blue energy, but this time, the effect was different. Instead of preparing to attack, they seemed to be drawing power from somewhere else, somewhere beyond normal space. You see, Voss continued, humanity, long ago, transcended the limitations that define your civilizations. We don't fight for territory, resources, or political advantage. We fight for the right of consciousness itself to exist free from predation, and we've become very, very good at it. Admiral Thane apparently decided that words were insufficient. All ships, open fire. The combined firepower of 300 ships lanced out toward the human vessels. Enough destructive energy to crack planets and boil away atmospheres. For a moment, space itself blazed with unleashed fury. But when the light faded, the human ships were unchanged. They hadn't been protected by shields or armor. The attacks had simply failed to affect them, as if the concepts of damage and destruction no longer applied. Impossible, someone whispered across the communication channels. Director Voss's voice cut through the stunned silence. Nothing is impossible, Admiral. Some things are simply more difficult than others. For instance, it's very difficult to destroy something that exists in a state of temporal flux, moving through past and future simultaneously. Your weapons fired at where we were, where we will be, and where we might be. That they missed where we are. One of the Galactic ships, a Centauri heavy cruiser, tried to ram the nearest human vessel. Kethvar watched in horrified fascination as the cruiser passed through the human ship without any effect, as if one of them wasn't entirely real. You want to understand what humanity has become? Voss asked, her voice now carrying undertones that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond sound. We are evolution incarnate. We are what happens when a species refuses to accept that anything is impossible. We have made ourselves into living weapons against entropy itself. The space around the human ships began to distort, reality bending like heated metal. Kethvar's sensors were screaming warnings about dimensional instabilities and causality violations. We could destroy your fleets, Voss continued. We could erase them from history, make it so they never existed. We could reach back through time and prevent your species from ever evolving. But we won't. Do you know why? The Galactic Coalition had stopped firing, their commanders apparently realizing that conventional weapons were useless against an enemy that operated outside the normal laws of physics. We won't destroy you because you're not our enemy. You're simply afraid, and fear makes people do foolish things. The real enemy, the one we've been fighting for millennia, feeds on fear, on suffering, on the destruction of hope itself. We've dedicated our existence to ensuring that no species ever has to face that kind of darkness alone. Director Voss touched another control, and suddenly every ship in the system was receiving detailed sensor data, information about Dominion fleet movements throughout the galaxy, intelligence on their tactics and weaknesses, strategic analyses that represented thousands of years of combat experience. Consider this a gift, Voss said. The knowledge to protect yourselves and your civilizations. But understand this. Humanity has returned not as conquerors, but as guardians. We've seen what lies in the dark between galaxies, and we've made ourselves into something capable of holding that darkness at bay. The human ships began to fade, not departing but simply becoming less real, as if they were stepping sideways out of normal existence. Where are you going? Kethvar found himself asking. Everywhere and nowhere, Director Voss replied. We exist in the spaces between moments, in the probability gaps where possibility becomes reality. We'll be watching, Admiral. And when the next threat emerges, as it inevitably will, we'll be there. The last thing Kethvar saw was Captain Chen's scarred face, and this time, her smile was almost gentle. Thank you for believing in legends, Admiral. Sometimes that's all it takes to make them real. And then they were gone, leaving behind only the fading echoes of energies that shouldn't exist, and the knowledge that the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had returned, not as the primitive species of ancient legend, but as something infinitely more terrifying and wonderful. They had become the guardians of existence itself, watching from the shadows between realities, ensuring that consciousness would always have a chance to flourish against the dark. The legends were true, and that, Kethvar realized as he looked out at the stars, was both the most comforting and most terrifying thing he had ever learned.